I'm very far back right now. Hello everyone, and welcome to Classical Journeys. Today, we're going to talk about 5 things I love about classical music, and really music in general, because most of these can apply to most genres of music. Let's get started. Now, this is true of really any music you listen to, any piece of music, any type of music. It's going to be connected to a type of history and culture, and that's a fascinating thing. If you listen to lots of types of different music, it's like being a tourist, but with your ears. It's amazing. And the same is true of classical music. Any piece of classical music is going to be connected to a history and a culture. And that gets even more and more true closer we get to our time in history. A tendency in earlier classical music is for it to be more depersonalized, more about a sort of entertainment and the craft of music making. But as we get further into the 19th century and the 20th century and the 21st century, composers more and more feel the urge to write music about their lives and the times they live in. And this is so fascinating. A lot of the music we'll be listening to, for example, was written during the World Wars. And you listen to all the music that was written during the World Wars, and it's like you hear the attitudes of all the people who lived during that time. Some composers wrote music that was very gritty and depicting violence of the war. Other composers wrote music that was really peaceful and very hopeful, depicting the hopes they had for a time after the war. When you listen to the music written at the time, you can hear the people of that time. It's very interesting. And the other beautiful thing about this, classical music for a long time was confined mostly to Europe. But as the world gets smaller and cultures are crossing and mixing and matching across the world, more and more composers from other countries and other cultures are adding their voice to the tapestry and tradition that is classical music. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a wonderful thing. And I love it. It's so amazing. So on this channel, I'd love to spend a lot of time listening to the music of composers that are from countries that you might not think of as being, classical music oriented countries, I guess you would say. This is another one that really applies to all types of music. Artistic evolution. There are some musical artists who they sort of just find their thing and they stick with it through their whole life. They sound kind of the same from the time they start making music to the time they stop making music. And there's nothing wrong with that. But personally, I'm very drawn to artists who go through phases, who are continually evolving their voice and finding new musical contexts to put their voice into. And I think it's fascinating to trace that journey from beginning to end for a musical artist who changes a lot. The prime example of this in pop music are the Beatles, of course. They start out as a pop rock band. They go into folk rock on Rubber Soul, and then they get really experimental on Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. Sort of have a grab bag of various things on the White Album. They experiment with prog rock like Sweets on Abbey Road. They go through just various phases, and it's fascinating to track that journey for any musical artist. And classical music is full of journeys like this. Classical journeys. But anyway, it's full of composers who start out sounding one way and they keep evolving their voice, and the composer who ends up on the other side sounds nothing like the composer who started, and it's just such a fascinating journey to track, and I love that. That's going to be a big focus of this channel as well. A prime example of this in classical music would be Russian composer Alexander Scriabin. So when he starts out, he starts writing music that's very heavily influenced by, say, Chopin. Very melancholic, melodic lines. very poignant chromatic harmony. Take a listen. Now, as beautiful as that music is, Scriabin doesn't stop there. He keeps evolving and exploring his own unique voice, shrouded in mystery, so evocative of something from another planet, like you're smelling a new smell that you've never smelled before, or hearing something you've never heard before. It's completely unique. Take a listen. Tracing that journey is something that I really love to do, and it's something we'll be doing a lot on this channel. If there's one thing that you take away from my channel, I want you to take away this. The various ways of making music are endless and vast, and it's incredible. If you've spent your entire life only listening to pop music and you think that's all there is, which, by the way, I'm not bashing pop music, but there's some great pop music out there. I'm not bashing you if you've only listened to pop music. What I want you to take away from this channel is that that's just a drop in the water out of the endless ocean of ways of making music there are. And even the music that I'll be covering on my channel is also just a drop in the ocean. I can't hope to possibly cover it all. What I do hope to do is expose my lovely audience members to a drop in the water that people aren't often exposed to in their day-to-day lives. What I'm hoping is that it enriches your life somehow and maybe changes your perspective on something. And this is one of the reasons why this is something that I love about music, is that no matter how much time you spend listening to vast amounts and varieties of music, there's always something that changes your perspective, or widens your perspective, I should say, and just makes your life that much richer. And I hope to do that for you guys on this channel. Now, this is one I've already sort of talked about in my last video. The difference between classical music and other genres. The picture-like atmosphere structure compared to the movie-like narrative structure that classical music tends to have. And I do think that's a fairly unique feature to classical music. I do think jazz has an element of narrative structure, actually, too. The difference being that in classical music, it's like a story that's already been written, being told. But in jazz music, it's like a story that's being acted out on the spot. That would be the difference in my mind, my perspective. But if you guys know any other genres of music or types of music besides classical music, also jazz music that has more of a narrative structure, you could let me know in the comments. You know, I don't know everything there is to know, obviously, so please let me know. I would love to hear about it. I put the question mark there because I'm not completely sure how to describe this one. I said packed content. Now, let me explain to you what I mean. Classical music has its origins in the church, in polyphonic chant. That's just a fancy word of saying there are multiple voices happening all at once. That's what the word polyphonic means. And so as a result, I think classical music has more of a tendency to have lots of different melodies and voices happening at once. It's fairly rare in classical music that you just have a melody and a chordal accompaniment. Obviously it happens, but it's not as common as you might think. Even when there's just a melody and accompaniment, the accompaniment tends to be made up of voices that are moving in a melodic way. And some people, if they're not used to that, it could be hard to hear all the voices that are going on at once. Now, this is not a unique feature to classical music. Of course, other genres have polyphonic textures, but it's certainly something that's very ubiquitous in classical music. It's something I really love. I don't know why, but I tend to be drawn to music that has lots of things going on at once. That one's more of like a personal taste of mine. So yeah, that's my video. 5 things I love about classical music and music in general. 3 of them were kind of universal truths about music. The last 2 were just sort of my personal tastes. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching the video. Please press like and subscribe. If you did, stay tuned for my next video. But what I do hope to do is bring people that drop of water in the ocean that is not often exposed in people's day-to-day lives.